This is the exact moment a 35-year political dynasty completely unraveled in a matter of minutes on live television. Watch closely as Senator John Kennedy and Representative Maxine Waters face off in a historic, devastating confrontation that permanently ended an era. The political world stood completely still as Senator John Kennedy leaned into his microphone and delivered a devastating reality check to Representative Maxine Waters. The pointing finger, long a defining symbol of her fierce political brand, stopped dead. It hung there, suspended halfway between the polished wood of the witness table and Senator Kennedy's designated seat on the banking committee. It was the distinct, unmistakable hesitation of a hand stopping in mid-motion, the precise moment when the human mind suddenly comprehends the immense gravity of what the body has just done. At the center of the dais, Chairman Tim Scott remained perfectly still. He did not lift his wooden gavel to intervene. To his immediate side, Senator Elizabeth Warren, the Banking Committee's ranking Democrat, and the very woman who had stood shoulder to shoulder with Maxine Waters through every major financial battle of the last 13 years, did not finish the vocal objection she had instinctively begun. Merely 30 seconds earlier, her mouth remained slightly parted in stunned silence. Further down the line, Senator Ruben Gallego, a battle-hardened Marine veteran of the Iraq War and the first Latino senator to represent the state of Arizona, deliberately set his pen down on his leather binder. He placed it carefully, with the absolute finality of a man who has made a profound decision and does not intend to pick the instrument up again. Meanwhile, exactly 3 rows behind the stark isolation of the witness table, a 47-year-old single mother from Compton, California, named Yolanda Mitchell quietly folded her hands in her lap. She simply sat, and she waited for the moment of reckoning she had spent 7 agonizing years hoping to witness. The stage for this unprecedented confrontation was Senate Office Building Room 216, a venue never originally intended for such an explosive political spectacle. The Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, under the leadership of Republican Chairman Tim Scott of South Carolina and Democratic Ranking Member Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, had taken a monumental vote in February of 2026. By a decisively bipartisan margin of 16-7, they had voted to invite Representative Maxine Waters to testify under oath. She was to be the lead subject of a deeply scrutinized hearing titled Examining Member Self-Enrichment and FEC Oversight, a Review of Slate Mailer Operations and Campaign Finance Compliance. The foundation of this extraordinary invitation was not rooted in partisan warfare, but rather in a singular, undeniable document. On the 2nd of June, 2025, the Federal Election Commission had publicly announced a conciliation agreement with a campaign committee known as Citizens for Waters. This committee, meticulously operated for 35 years by Representative Waters as longtime Treasurer David Gould, had formally agreed to pay a civil penalty amounting to $68,000. The federal agreement explicitly outlined 3 distinct categories of severe violations that occurred during the 2020 calendar year. First, the committee had knowingly accepted excessive campaign contributions totaling $19,000 from 7 individual donors. Second, they had made 4 explicitly prohibited cash disbursements, each exceeding $100, which totaled $7,000 in illegal cash flow. Finally, they had systematically failed to accurately report both their financial receipts and their operational disbursements. When the formal invitation from the Banking Committee finally arrived at her sprawling office in the Rayburn House office building, Maxine Waters was presented with 3 distinct paths. She could outright refuse to appear, thereby risking the severe consequence of being held in contempt of Congress. She could choose to appear, but invoke her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Or she could walk proudly into Hart 216, raise her right hand, place it firmly upon a text of her choosing, and answer every single question under the unyielding scrutiny of an oath. She unequivocally chose the third option. In her 35 years dominating American political life, Maxine Waters had never lost a televised confrontation, and she fundamentally did not believe she was going to lose this one. She made her entrance into the solemn hearing room at precisely 9:51 inches the morning. She was striking in a magenta Chanel suit, an elegant garment she had purchased in Paris during the spring of 2017. It was the specific color she intentionally wore for political battles she fully intended to dominate. Clutched in her hand was a signature yellow legal pad, an accessory her congressional staff often joked nobody had ever actually witnessed her write a single word upon. She offered a confident smile to the blinding flashes of the press photographers clustered in the room. At 10:03, Chairman Scott formally called the monumental hearing to order. Just 5 minutes later, at 10:08, Maxine Waters made the critical miscalculation that would ultimately end her career. Madam Ranking Member, you are recognized for a 5-minute opening statement. Maxine Waters did not rest her hands comfortably on the witness table. Instead, she stood up. It was a rare move. She almost never sat when delivering opening statements. She had learned a harsh political lesson decades ago, back in 1976, while serving in the California State Assembly. A woman who remains seated is a woman who can easily be ignored by powerful men. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Though I want to begin by noting for the permanent record that I absolutely do not recognize this committee as fundamental authority to summon a sitting member of the United States House of Representatives in the middle of an active ex-session legislative session. This is on a matter that falls entirely within the exclusive jurisdiction of the House Committee on Ethics, of which I am no longer a subject of inquiry. Having been thoroughly cleared in the year 2012, Mr. Chairman, this hearing is not a genuine fact-finding exercise. This hearing is nothing more than the laundromat of right-wing media that has shamelessly lied about my family for 30 years, now being given the official imprimatur of the United States Senate. This hearing is the front parlor of a dictator-esque court. She raised her index finger. It shot upward like an orchestra conductor's baton, exactly the way it had come up at Stephen Mnuchin in 2017, the way it had come up at Scott Pruitt just 6 weeks prior, and the way it had been leveled at Donald Trump thousands of times over the course of 8 years. Donald Trump is a dictator. The American people, in their flawed wisdom, in their deep fear, and in their ultimate fatigue, elected a dictator. And the United States Senate Committee on Banking is now serving as the front parlor of his corrupt court. I will not pretend otherwise. I will absolutely not yield to the polite fiction that we are gathered here today to examine campaign finance compliance. We are here simply because Donald Trump's weaponized Department of Justice cannot legally indict me, and so the Republican Party has cowardly assembled the next best thing, a public inquisition. I will not be lectured today by a Louisiana plantation lawyer who proudly voted to confirm 3 Supreme Court justices stolen from the citizens of this country. I will not be lectured by a man holding a Vanderbilt diploma who pretends to chew tobacco for the cameras of a television network owned by Rupert Murdoch's children. I will not be lectured by a Republican Party that, in this very chamber, voted last year to recklessly invade Iran without the explicit consent of the United States Congress. She abruptly turned her body physically, facing Yolanda Mitchell directly. And I will most certainly not pretend to be moved by the orchestrated testimony of a paid prop, a witness purchased by a Republican Party that has completely run out of legitimate policy arguments and now shamelessly imports the survivors of completely unrelated tragedies into its solemn hearing rooms merely to manufacture cheap sympathy. She turned back around, her gaze locking intensely onto Senator Tim Scott. Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, sir, you are a black man. You carry heavily on your back every single day the immense burden of a Republican Party that fundamentally hates you in the exact same way it has always hated me. The only difference between us, sir, is that I have always known exactly who hated me. You may God help you still foolishly believe you can somehow earn their love. You will not earn it today. You will not earn it tomorrow. And when you finally go home to South Carolina, at the end of all of this, sir, the exact same people who clapped for you this morning will be the ones voting against your judicial nominees in the year 2028. You will not silence me, sir. I will not be silenced. With that, she sat down. The anticipated wave of applause from the Democratic side of the dais was deafeningly absent. Senator Elizabeth Warren kept her hands perfectly still. Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, a pragmatic moderate, simply stared down at the polished surface of the table. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada, a prominent Latino Democrat from Las Vegas, closed her eyes tightly for one full, heavy second. Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia, the respected pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, and a man who had peacefully marched in the very same historical places Maxine Waters had marched, looked at her for a fleeting moment before deliberately turning his gaze away. Senator Ruben Gallego, the battle-tested Marine with 3 harrowing deployments to Iraq, left his pen resting exactly where he had placed it. On the Republican side of the aisle, Chairman Tim Scott did not so much as blink. Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming quietly closed her thick notebook. Senator Katie Britt of Alabama cast her eyes downward toward her folded hands. Senator Pete Ricketts of Nebraska scribbled a single, solitary word onto his legal pad. Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee leaned heavily back into his leather chair. Situated in the second row of the designated observer seats, a section specifically reserved for House members invited by the committee's bipartisan leadership, Representative Joyce Beatty of Ohio sat completely frozen. At 76 years old, she was a towering figure in her own right. She had served for 13 consequential years on the House Financial Services Committee alongside Maxine Waters. She had been the formidable chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. She had personally founded the bipartisan Congressional Civility and Respect Caucus. Most importantly, she was the only individual in that massive room who had ever, within the quiet privacy of an MSNBC green room, affectionately referred to Maxine Waters as her sister. Now, she pressed her lips into a remarkably thin line and did not move a muscle. 3 rows directly behind Maxine Waters, occupying seat 9 of row 3, Yolanda Mitchell kept her eyes fixed intently upon the carpet. She had made a firm decision 3 weeks prior, while standing in the bustling kitchen of her painstakingly rebuilt bakery on Long Beach Boulevard in Compton, that she was absolutely not going to look at Maxine Waters until the moment truly required it. Sitting directly beside her was her 25-year-old son, Marcus. He was dressed in a crisp, navy blue long-sleeve button-down shirt. The shirt was securely buttoned all the way down at his wrists. Marcus Mitchell strictly wore long sleeves across all temperatures and in all environments, with the sole exception being the private kitchen of their family bakery, where his mother was the only living person he permitted to look upon his scarred arms. In row 4, seat 7, sat Sergeant Marcus Coleman of the California National Guard. At 31 years old, boasting 3 grueling overseas deployments, he sat impeccably in his dress greens adorned with 3 hard-earned campaign ribbons. His hands were respectfully folded. He had proudly cast his ballot for Joe Biden in the 2020 election. He had proudly voted for Vice President Kamala Harris in the 2024 election. The evening prior to this very hearing, he had anxiously asked a junior staffer in Senator Kennedy's office if his physical presence might be wrongfully misinterpreted as a partisan Republican endorsement. He had been explicitly assured that he was being asked merely to be present in the room. He was not there to speak. He was not there to be photographed. He was just there to bear witness. The senator from Louisiana, Mr. Kennedy, is recognized for 7 minutes. Senator John Kennedy did not stand up. Protocol dictates that a United States senator does not stand to address a witness. Instead, he placed both of his hands flat against the cool surface of the dais. Resting directly in front of him was a standard yellow legal pad. The pad bore 6 specific dates, meticulously written out in blue ink, accompanied by a single heavily circled dollar amount scrawled in the margin. That dollar amount was $68,000. He stared at the number for a moment, then slowly lifted his eyes. "Madame Chairwoman, I beg your pardon. Ma'am, the gentlewoman from California is not the chairwoman today. Madam Ranking Member." His voice carried the distinct slow drawl of a man who had been raised in the deep south of Centerville, Mississippi, who had gone on to study at Vanderbilt, then to the prestigious University of Virginia School of Law, and finally across the ocean to Oxford in England. It was there, he often noted, that the British academics had taught him a valuable lesson. The only creature meaner than a Mississippi possum was a Mississippi possum that spent its life pretending to be a chicken. He spoke with deliberate slowness. He never once raised his voice. In fact, he had not raised his voice during a Senate hearing in 9 long years. The gentlewoman is partly correct. I am indeed from Louisiana. I am an attorney. I went to Vanderbilt. I went to UVA Law. I went to Oxford in England. Ma'am, where the brilliant British professors taught me that the only thing meaner than a Mississippi possum is a Mississippi possum that pretends to be a chicken. Ivy thought about that specific observation a whole lot over the course of the last 18 months. Now, ma'am, I am not going to ask you a single question about Donald Trump this morning. I am not going to ask you about the 25th Amendment. I am not going to ask you about the threat of civil war. I am not going to ask you about Vladimir Putin, or Bashar al-Assad, or Israel, or Iran, or Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, every single one of whom you have angrily blamed this morning for the very things you yourself have been formally accused of. Instead, I am going to ask you about a check. Just one single check, ma'am, to start. Now, before I do that, I want you to know something. Sitting behind you, ma'am, right there in row 3 of the observer seating, is a woman from Compton, California. Her name is Mrs. Yolanda Mitchell. She lives at 4306 Olive Avenue. Her zip code is 90220. She resides in your congressional district, ma'am. She has lived in your congressional district for her entire life. Her mother proudly voted for you in 1990. She herself voted for you in 2010 and 2012 and 2014 and 2016. I am going to let Mrs. Mitchell tell her own harrowing story when her time comes. For right now, ma'am, I just want you to know that I know you saw her when you walked into this massive room this morning. And I know you saw the young boy sitting quietly beside her. And I know you made the deliberate decision not to look at them. You don't have to defend that decision, ma'am. I am simply naming it out loud, so that we can begin. All right, ma'am. Let us begin. On the 2nd of June 2025, exactly 10 months ago, the Federal Election Commission entered into a formal conciliation agreement with a campaign committee called Citizens for Waters. That committee is officially registered to you. You are the designated candidate. Your campaign treasurer, a man by the name of David Gould, signed the legal agreement. Your campaign attorney, a woman by the name of Leilani Beaver, sent a formal letter to the FEC in May of 2025, explicitly acknowledging the violations. I possess a certified copy of that conciliation agreement right here. Ma'am. It is signed. It is dated. It is publicly available information. Anybody watching this televised hearing this morning can easily pull it up on the FEC's official website in less than 5 minutes using their cellular telephone. Page 2, paragraph 1. It states that your committee knowingly accepted excessive financial contributions in the calendar years 2019 and 2020, totaling $19,000 from 7 distinct individual donors. The legal contribution limit is $2,800 per individual per election. Did your committee accept contributions in excess of that federal limit? Yes or no, ma'am? The committee, Mr. Gould, these are purely administrative. Yes or no, ma'am? The committee's own conciliation agreement, signed by your own treasurer, explicitly says, knowingly accepted. That is not my wording, ma'am. That is the official ruling of the FEC. Yes. Page 2, paragraph 2. Your committee made 4 separate cash disbursements during the 2020 election cycle, each in excess of $100. The total amount was $7,000 in pure cash. Ma'am. Federal election law strictly caps all cash disbursements at $100 per transaction. Yes or no? It was during the COVID pandemic, our frontline get-out-the-vote canvassers simply could not physically process Madame Ranking Member, yes or no? Yes. On the 2nd of June 2025, your committee officially paid a civil fine of $68,000 to the Federal Election Commission to permanently settle these exact violations. Yes or no? Yes. Now, ma'am, I would like to read you something. This is a direct quote from a letter your campaign attorney, Mrs. Beaver, sent to the FEC on May 14th of 2025. The committee acknowledges errors were made, which were not willful or purposeful. End quote. Errors, ma'am. Now, I run a small, modest farm down in Madisonville, Louisiana. If I suddenly made $26,000 worth of errors on my federal income taxes, knowing errors, ma'am, the exact kind your committee just admitted to making the IRS, would not simply fine me $68,000. The IRS would promptly place me in a federal correctional facility in Pollock, Louisiana, ma'am, where I would slowly learn how to manufacture license plates, one single license plate at a time, for a considerable number of years. A small, involuntary laugh nervously fluttered through the quiet room. It originated from Senator Pete Ricketts, who immediately clamped his hand firmly over his mouth, but it was already too late. The sound had escaped. Maxine Waters' index finger instantly shot back up into the air. Stop. But the damage was unequivocally done. Maxine Waters, the fiercely unapologetic woman, who for 9 consecutive years had aggressively pointed her finger at political adversaries and relentlessly demanded strict yes or no answers, had just been forced to provide 3 direct yes or no answers herself, under solemn oath, broadcast live on national television, regarding a substantial financial penalty her own political campaign had already admitted to in binding writing. Now, ma'am, this next part troubles me even more. Your campaign committee, Citizens for Waters, has continuously paid your daughter, Karen Waters, in steady installments over the course of the last 22 years, an astonishing sum of approximately $1,200,000. The source for this is the Federal Election Commission's quarterly disclosure database, which is completely publicly available, ma'am, on the FEC's own website, on a secure domain registered to the United States government. Between January of 2021 and December of 2022, a period of exactly 24 months, your committee paid your own daughter $192,300. The source remains the exact same database. These massive payments are conveniently categorized under the vague heading Slate Mailer Management Fee. A slate mailer, for the benefit of the American audience watching this morning, is essentially a piece of paper that is mass-mailed to registered voters in California. It contains a prominent endorsement from a powerful member of Congress, in this specific case, you. Ma M placed right alongside the names of other political candidates who have essentially paid your campaign for the distinct privilege of appearing on that very same piece of paper. This paper is sometimes commonly referred to as a sample ballot. It is routinely mailed to approximately 200,000 households situated in south-central Los Angeles. The candidates who pay your campaign for this lucrative privilege are not your constituents. Ma am, they are paying clients. The Federal Election Commission did issue you an advisory opinion back in 2004, legally permitting this arrangement. They explicitly told you, Ma am, that you physically could do it. They absolutely did not tell you that you morally should do it. I know the vast difference between the two. Ma am, I attended law school. As of this very morning, Ma am, you are the singular sitting member of the United States Congress, the absolute only member from either political party. Residing in either chamber, representing any state in the Union who is currently running a commercial slate mailer operation directly through your federal campaign committee. Your respected colleagues are not doing this. Your close friends are not doing this. The esteemed members of the Congressional Black Caucus, of which you are currently the most senior living member, are not doing this. Senator Warren, sitting right here on the banking committee with me, is not doing this. Speaker Mike Johnson is not doing this. Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi is not doing this. You, Ma am, standing entirely alone among 535 elected members, are doing this. And you have continuously paid your daughter, Karen Waters, who conveniently runs a consulting firm called Progressive Connections, registered in the state of California. Before that, she ran an organization called LA Vote, which the Los Angeles Times rigorously reported. Back in the year 2004, had already collected $1.7 million in mailer fees from local Los Angeles candidates over an 8-year period. Well over $1,200,000 in total. Now, Ma am, in 2004, the LA Times formally asked you about these staggering payments. You boldly told the investigative reporter on the permanent record, "We don't have to answer your questions. We are not bad people. We are not bad people." Ma am, that particular sentence is perhaps the most inherently defensive sentence the human mouth can possibly shape. People who are genuinely not bad people do not feel the burning need to say it out loud. They simply exist as good people. The median household income in California, S43rd Congressional District, your own district, Ma am, the very district you have been elected to represent since 1991, is approximately $62,000 per year. Your daughter Karen Waters made nearly $200,000 in a mere 24 months, simply running a mailer business straight out of your political campaign committee. That is more than 3 full times the median household income of the hard-working families in your own district, Ma am. 3 times. Paid straight out of your campaign committee. Paid straight out of the grassroots donations sent to you by the desperate people in your district, who truly believed they were sending their hard-earned money to help you fight for them in Washington. 3 times what they themselves make, Ma am, out of the very money they sacrifice to send you. What kind of person, Ma am, takes 3 times what their struggling constituents make, paid directly out of those exact same constituents' heartfelt donations, and funnels it straight to her own daughter year after year for 22 straight years? I will tell you exactly what kind. Ma am. A person who has completely forgotten who paid the freight. Maxine Waters immediately stood up. Her political staff had desperately warned her not to stand on the tense night before the hearing. They had explicitly cautioned her that the visual optics of standing would immediately read to the cameras as desperation and panic. They had rigorously walked her through the precise body language they wanted her to project, hands folded calmly, voice kept low, offering an occasional polite concession that the committee possessed the basic right to ask the questions, even if she deeply resented the act of asking. She stood up anyway. Maxine Waters had not ascended to the pinnacle of American power by meekly listening to the cautious advice of her staff. Mr. Chairman, I have sat in this chair this morning for exactly 41 minutes. I have been relentlessly insulted by a Republican senator representing a state, Louisiana, that currently suffers the absolute worst infant mortality rate among black children in the entirety of the United States of America. I have been wildly insulted by a senator who built his entire reputation on this very committee by cruelly mocking a distinguished federal judge of color simply for not being able to perfectly define an obscure legal term that absolutely nobody residing outside the walls of Cornell Law School could possibly define. I have been, Madame Ranking Member. I am not finished, Mr. Chairman. I have proudly spent 35 long years in this Congress. 35. I physically marched in the segregated city of Selma, Alabama, in the bloody spring of 1965. Where exactly were you, Senator Kennedy? You were a privileged 14-year-old boy living in Mississippi. Your sitting senator at that volatile time was a hateful man named James Eastland, who had served in the United States Senate since 1943 and who had aggressively voted every single time against every single civil rights bill that ever made its way to the Senate floor. You directly inherited James Eastland's seat in your political party, sir. You directly inherited his version of Mississippi. I sat right here in this Capitol building when Newt Gingrich tried to break Bill Clinton in 1998. I sat in this Capitol when George W. Bush recklessly sent our brave men and women to Iraq in 2003 on a fabricated lie that this very body, which I loyally served, foolishly voted to authorize. I sat in this Capitol when Donald Trump violently asked the United States military to forcefully clear peaceful American protesters out of Lafayette Park in 2020, just so that he could stage a photo opportunity holding up a Bible at St. John's Church. I have personally raised, within my time in this Congress, Mr. Chairman, well over $1 billion in crucial campaign funds for the Democratic Party. I have utilized those massive funds to successfully elect black women to high office in hostile places where black women were never supposed to win. I have tearfully buried my husband. I have tirelessly raised my children. I have faithfully paid my mortgage. I have fiercely served the resilient people of California's 43rd District through raging fires, through devastating earthquakes, through violent riots, through a global pandemic, through literally every single catastrophe this fragile nation has visited upon the city of Los Angeles in 50 years. And you, sir, are going to sit right there and dare to tell me that I have somehow forgotten who paid the freight? I yield, Mr. Chairman. With utter contempt, she sat back down heavily. She rigidly refused to look at Senator Kennedy. Senator Kennedy, mirroring her defiance, did not look at her either. He simply turned over the topmost page on his yellow legal pad. Madam Ranking Member, with all due respect, I am absolutely not going to sit here and pretend you did not bravely march in Selma. I am not going to pretend that James Eastland wasn't a product of my home state. I am certainly not going to pretend that the Republican Party of 1965 was a political party I would have ever wanted to belong to. I am not going to do that, ma'am. I owe you infinitely better than that. What I am going to do, ma'am, is read you something else. On the 8th of June 2025, approximately 3 weeks after your campaign committee quietly paid that $68,000 fine, You traveled to a facility called the Metropolitan Detention Center, located in downtown Los Angeles, California. That specific facility was the focal site of massive public protests mobilized against United States immigration and customs enforcement. The governor of California, Mr. Gavin Newsom, your fellow prominent Democrat, Ma-Am, had officially deployed a specialized unit of the California National Guard to the facility to actively maintain public order at the direct request of the city of Los Angeles. You boldly walked right up to those deployed troops, Ma-Am. They were standing professionally in formation directly outside the building. You were wearing a distinct green jacket, prominently featuring the official seal of the United States Congress. You loudly identified yourself to them, and then you said, and I am directly quoting from the verified public transcript officially published by the National Legal and Policy Center, which you are entirely welcome to formally dispute, Ma-Am, except for the inconvenient fact that your exact words were clearly captured on 3 completely separate civilian cell phone videos. Quote, "Who are you going to target? If you were going to target me, you better target straight." End quote. Did you aggressively say those exact words, Ma-Am, to active American National Guard troops standing in full uniform in authorized formation on sovereign American soil? Yes or no? I simply asked them what specific side they were on. Innocent children, American children, were being Ma-Am, please, yes or no. Kennedy then turned his body very slightly. In his heavy leather chair, he gestured gently, utilizing the soft, encouraging motion a seasoned Sunday school teacher might use to beckon a shy child in the back row of a crowded classroom directly toward row 4 of the observer seating. "Sergeant Coleman, would you kindly stand for just one moment, sir?" Sergeant Marcus Coleman stood up instantly. He did not cast a glance at Senator Kennedy. He completely ignored the glowing red lights of the C-SPAN cameras. Instead, he locked his unwavering gaze squarely on Chairman Tim Scott. He assumed the position of parade rest, and he waited. Sergeant Coleman is a dedicated member of the California Army National Guard. He was one of the specific soldiers standing the line in formation outside the Metropolitan Detention Center on June 8th of last year. He courageously came here this morning entirely at his own personal initiative. I want the watching American people to clearly know, Ma-Am, that Sergeant Coleman is a registered Democrat. He proudly voted for Joseph Robinette Biden in 2020. He proudly voted for Vice President Kamala Debbie Harris in 2024. He has never once cast a vote for a Republican in his entire life, Ma-Am. And he has certainly not been asked to do so today. Sergeant Coleman is the very man you aggressively spoke to. He is the specific man you publicly asked out on a public street to target straight. Sergeant Coleman did not utter a single syllable. He did not turn his head an inch. He provided absolutely no visual response to the flashing cameras. After 4 profound seconds of silence, he smoothly sat back down. "Mr. Chairman, is work complete?" The senator from Louisiana yields the balance of his time. The chair calls the second witness, Mrs. Yolanda Mitchell. "Please come forward to the witness table." Yolanda Mitchell stood up slowly from row 3. She was 47 years old. She was wearing a simple conservative navy blue dress that she had carefully purchased at a local Target in Long Beach, California, exactly 3 weeks earlier, entirely in preparation for this exact terrifying morning. She walked the 8 short steps from row 3 up to the daunting witness table. She nervously took the chair positioned immediately to Maxine Waters' right. This was the precise chair that just 2 hours earlier had been explicitly set aside for a prestigious academic witness from the Brookings Institution, an expert who had very quietly withdrawn his participation merely 3 days before the hearing commenced. The committee clerk approached and administered the solemn oath. "I do." she replied softly. Her hand did not shake. Mrs. Mitchell, you are officially recognized for 2 minutes for an opening statement. Yolanda Mitchell did not bring any notes to the table. She had not drafted a prepared statement. She looked for a long, searching moment at Chairman Scott. Then she looked directly at Senator Kennedy. Then, for the absolute first time that entire morning, she physically turned her body in her chair and looked directly, unblinkingly, at the powerful woman sitting beside her. Maxine Waters did not turn to meet her gaze. Yolanda Mitchell eventually turned back, facing the elevated dais. Mr. Chairman, respected members of the committee, I sincerely thank you for the opportunity to come here today. My name is Yolanda Mitchell. I live at 4306 Olive Avenue in Compton, California. My zip code is 90220. I have proudly lived in California's 43rd Congressional District for my entire life. My beloved mother Bernice voted for the Congresswoman in 1990. I personally voted for the Congresswoman in 2010, 2012, 2014, and 2016. In 2014, I finally managed to open a small independent bakery located on Long Beach Boulevard. The bakery was named Yolanda's Sweet Home Bakery. I proudly employed 7 local people. 3 of them were local teenage boys whose exhausted mothers worked grueling overnight shifts at LAX, cleaning the dirty cabins of airplanes. Those young boys came in every day after school. They diligently learned how to roll the dough. I faithfully paid them $10 an hour, entirely in cash, every single Friday, straight out of a locked metal box I securely kept hidden inside the freezer. I paid them in cash because their struggling families desperately needed that money on Friday, and the local bank was always closed on Saturday. In June of 2018, the Congresswoman publicly appeared on a stage in Los Angeles before a massive, riled-up crowd, and she boldly told the people of this country on national television, and I quote her exactly, "Sir, because I have watched the painful video 300 times. If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out, and you create a crowd, and you push back on them, and you tell them they are not welcome anymore. Anywhere." End quote. Mitchell took a ragged breath. On the fateful night of the 21st of October 2018, at approximately 9:15 p.m., a loyal customer finally left my bakery. He was a frequent regular. His name was Mr. Lawrence Ortega. He was a kindly retired postal carrier. He had proudly voted that very morning in the early voting cycle for a political candidate who was explicitly not endorsed by the Congresswoman. He was innocently wearing a red hat with bold white lettering when he exited my shop. 3 young men who had been aggressively loitering across the street, young men who had watched the Congresswoman's fiery speech that summer, who had violently decided on their own that the speech meant they should proactively follow Mr. Ortega and physically confront him through a glass bottle completely filled with a dangerous incendiary substance directly through the front window of my beloved bakery. They callously lit a rag and threw a match. Sir, I absolutely do not personally blame the Congresswoman for the wicked acts they committed that night, but 3 of my teenage employees were trapped in the back of the bakery, diligently putting away the heavy closing dishes. My precious son Marcus, who was only 17 years old at the time, and who is sitting quietly behind me right now in row 3, was working in the front directly behind the counter. He had generously stayed late that night just to help me close up shop. My brave son desperately tried to put out the raging chemical fire using only a damp bath towel. He suffered horrific second-degree burns across both of his arms, extending from his wrists all the way up to his elbows, long before the fire department finally arrived. He was agonizingly hospitalized for 11 full days at Martin Luther King Jr. Community Hospital, located on East 120th Street in the Willowbrook section of South Los Angeles. That very hospital, sir, and sits exactly 2 miles away from the luxurious home of Karen Waters, the Congresswoman's daughter, over in Hancock Park. My strong son is 25 years old now. He dutifully works the heavy dough every single morning at 5:00 a.m. at our newly rebuilt bakery, located just 2 doors down from where the original burned-out shell once stood. He perpetually wears long sleeves in the blistering heat of July, in the sweltering humidity of August, in every single season, entirely because he desperately does not want our loyal regulars to see the horrific physical toll that 2018 violently cost him. I gave exactly one brief interview to the Los Angeles Times back in November of 2018, shortly after the destroyed bakery permanently closed. The reporter pointedly asked me what I would want to say to Maxine Waters if given the chance. I honestly told her I don't know what the Congresswoman meant. I just know what they heard. I shockingly received 73 vicious threats over the course of the next 4 agonizing months. 3 of my dedicated employees abruptly quit because their fearful landlords explicitly told them they would absolutely not renew their residential leases if they continued working at my targeted shop. My own commercial landlord coldly refused to renew my business lease. In January of 2019, I officially closed the scarred doors of the original Yolanda's Sweet Home forever. On February 11th, 2019. Madam Ranking Member, I am absolutely not here asking for a hollow apology. I am absolutely not here asking for financial compensation. I have never once asked for a dime of money. I am not even here asking for justice. The malicious boys who threw the deadly device were rightly sent to a state correctional facility up in Solano County. The good Lord has already settled that specific part of the ledger. I am merely asking, and I am asking only this, that the very next time a prominent member of the United States House of Representatives purposefully goes on national television and brazenly tells the American people to actively confront innocent strangers in local restaurants, that member, please remember that absolutely not every confrontation in the volatile streets of Los Angeles safely ends with just a heated argument. Some of them end tragically, with my innocent son strapped to a hospital gurney, suffering horrific second-degree burns all over his arms. That is all I came here to say. Sir, I yield. Mr. Chairman, I formally object to the underlying relevance of this highly emotional testimony. The criminal acts of 3 independent private individuals, however deeply tragic, Madam Ranking Member, the witness rightfully has the floor. You are not officially recognized. But, Mr. Chairman, this specific committee fundamentally has no legal jurisdiction. Madam Ranking Member, you are completely out of order. Chairman Scott's gavel did not fall. He simply did not need the wood to make his point. His authority silenced her. Maxine Waters begrudgingly sat back down. Yolanda Mitchell still did not look at her. In row 3, Marcus Mitchell, sitting quietly in his navy blue long-sleeve button-down shirt, did not look up from the floor. Yolanda Mitchell had just bravely delivered her heartbreaking truth to the United States Senate, entirely under the threat of perjury, sitting face-to-face with the incredibly powerful woman whose reckless words she directly traced back to her teenage son's agonizing hospital bed, and she demanded nothing but accountability. The chair recognizes, on a rare point of personal privilege, concurrent with the established jurisdiction of this committee, the gentlewoman from the state of Ohio, Congresswoman Joyce Beatty. For exactly 1 minute. Congresswoman Beatty, you have previously indicated to this chair that you possess a formal statement you wish to officially enter into the congressional record. Representative Joyce Beatty slowly stood up from the second row of the crowded observer seats. She was 76 years old. She was elegantly dressed in a stark black John knit suit, accented only by a small, tasteful pearl pin she had lovingly inherited from her late husband, Otto Beatty, Jr., a prominent attorney from Columbus, Ohio, who had sadly passed away in 2021. She had faithfully served the people in the United States Congress since 2013. She had fiercely led as the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus from 2021 to 2023. At this precise moment in her distinguished life, she stood as the proud founder and active co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Civility and Respect Caucus, an essential institution she had painstakingly created with her own two hands. Back in 2023, in direct response to a horrifying moment of raw incivility she had personally witnessed unfold in the very well of the United States House of Representatives, she did not cast her eyes toward Senator Kennedy. She completely ignored the presence of the C-SPAN cameras. Instead, she stared for a long, heavy moment directly at the back of Maxine Waters' as perfectly quiet head. Mr. Chairman, I am a fiercely proud Democrat. I am the respected Chair Emerita of the Congressional Black Caucus. I have faithfully served on the House Financial Services Committee, sitting directly side by side with Maxine Waters, since the very first day I was officially sworn into the United States Congress. I have personally raised substantial money for her campaigns. I have actively campaigned for her on the ground in California. I have proudly sat securely at her right hand during 3 massive Democratic national conventions. I have affectionately called her more than once, in the quiet privacy of a green room at MSNBC, my beloved sister. I am absolutely not going to blindly defend the gentlewoman from California today. I am also not standing here, Mr. Chairman, to viciously attack her either. I am standing right here simply because of the profound truth of what Mrs. Mitchell just bravely said. I have spent 58 long years of my adult life living in this complex country as a black woman hailing from Dayton, Ohio. I have tearfully buried my own husband. I have tirelessly raised 2 successful children. I have bravely run for high office in difficult places where they absolutely did not want me to win. I know deep down in my very bones exactly what it painfully costs a black woman to boldly walk into a massive room completely full of powerful Republican senators and look another prominent black woman directly in the face and tell her that she has profoundly failed her. Mrs. Mitchell did not travel all this way here today to maliciously embarrass anyone. She bravely came here, Mr. Chairman, simply because her innocent son is now 25 years old, and he daily lives with agonizing physical scars he never once chose to carry, and he wears suffocating long sleeves in the dead heat of July, simply because he desperately does not want innocent strangers walking into his mother's bakery to see exactly what a reckless political speech made in 2018 brutally cost him. Madame Ranking Member, Sister, I am begging you today, not as a hostile member of the political opposition, because I am most certainly not a member of the opposition. I am begging you as a loyal member of the very caucus you and I painstakingly built together back when you and I were much younger, much more hopeful women in this cynical town than we currently are right now. I am begging you to just look at Mrs. Mitchell just one single time before this brutal hearing officially ends, and just say something. Say anything. The specific word, sorry, is not even strictly required here. Simply saying the words, I hear you, would be more than enough. Just 3 simple words, Maxine. Just 3. Today. She paused, letting the desperate plea hang in the air. Maxine Waters did not turn around. For one long, agonizing second, the absolute only audible sound inside the massive expanse of Heart 216 was the soft, rhythmic humming of the ventilation duct hidden high up in the ceiling. Mr. Chairman, I yield. She sat down, looking utterly defeated. Maxine Waters' previously frozen index finger still hovered stubbornly in the air. Senator Kennedy remained motionless, watching the scene unfold like a master chess player who has already announced checkmate. Chairman Scott slowly reached for his wooden gavel, utilizing the precise, deliberate motion a chairman employs when preparing to awkwardly bring a derailed hearing back onto its strictly scheduled track. He was just about to formally recognize the very next committee member in line for routine questioning when an unexpected movement caught his eye. A man seated at the absolute farthest left edge of the elevated dais, a junior member who had definitively not been listed on Senator Kennedy's strategic witness list, and who had remarkably only been officially notified of this entire hearing late on the previous afternoon, suddenly raised his hand high. The chair recognizes the junior senator from the state of Arizona, Mr. Gallego. For a brief point of personal privilege, Senator Ruben Gallego stood up to his full height. He was 46 years old. He had been officially sworn into the prestigious United States Senate just over a year ago, on the 3rd of January 2025, proudly standing as the very first Latino senator in the long history of the state of Arizona. Long before he was a powerful member of the United States Senate, he had dutifully served 4 consecutive terms in the United States House of Representatives. And long before he was a member of the House, he had served in the Arizona State Legislature. But before any of that political maneuvering, he had served proudly and violently in the United States Marine Corps. He had deployed to the chaotic hellscape of Iraq in the bloody year of 2005. His specific combat company, Lima 3/25, had tragically taken some of the absolute highest casualties of the entire bitter war. He had personally helped bury fallen members of his own platoon in the dusty earth of Husaybah, deep in the volatile Al-Anbar province, on the grim day of the 17th of April 2005. Politically, he was practically the polar opposite of John Kennedy. He had defiantly voted against confirming Senator Kennedy as highly preferred Federal Reserve nominee just last year. He had consistently and vocally voted against the vast majority of Senator Kennedy's sweeping banking legislation. He had even bluntly told a national reporter in November of 2025 that he fundamentally disagreed with Senator Kennedy on literally every single meaningful policy issue, with the sole solitary exception of the shared proposition that wealthy federal government employees absolutely should not be paid during a catastrophic government shutdown. He stood up tall and deliberately adjusted his microphone, pulling it closer. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I am a fiercely proud Democrat. I am the junior senator, proudly representing the great state of Arizona. I aggressively voted against Senator Kennedy's last conservative nominee for the Federal Reserve. I strongly voted against his controversial energy and water appropriations bill just last fall. I completely do not agree with his stance on the Build Now Act. I vehemently do not agree with his extreme views on the CFPB. I do not frankly agree with him on much of anything at all. However, at exactly 6:00 yesterday evening, Mr. Chairman, the panicked Chief of Staff, representing the gentlewoman from California's main congressional office down in Inglewood, California, frantically called my Phoenix office. He aggressively demanded that my own Chief of Staff immediately issue a strong public statement this morning, well before this hearing even began, loudly denouncing this entire legitimate proceeding as a desperate Republican witch hunt, as a vicious, racially motivated partisan attack on a highly senior woman of color serving within the Democratic caucus, and as a pathetic attempt by Senator Kennedy to illegally relitigate a settled federal ethics inquiry that was conclusively resolved in the gentlewoman's favor back in the year 2012. I am absolutely not going to do that today, Mr. Chairman. I am a United States Marine. I proudly served my country in the dust of Iraq in 2005. I tragically lost brave members of my own platoon in the unforgiving city of Husaybah, deep in Al-Anbar province. On the 17th of April, that terrible year, the honorable men I bled and served alongside included good men of every single color and every single faith and every single geographic region of this great country. The quiet sergeant sitting respectfully back there in row 4 is wearing the exact same uniform that I once wore with pride. The brave sergeant in row 4 honorably served 3 brutal deployments to a hostile country that absolutely none of his pampered colleagues sitting here in the United States Congress have ever dared to serve in. The dedicated sergeant in row 4 is a registered Democrat, Mr. Chairman. The sergeant in row 4 proudly voted for Vice President Harris this past November. I am absolutely not going to sit silently in a United States Senate hearing room, permanently on the public record broadcast, live on C-SPAN, while a fellow prominent Democrat casually suggests out on a public street, directly in front of 3 recording cell phone cameras, that absolutely any American man or woman, bravely wearing the uniform of the California Army National Guard, should be threateningly told you better target straight as some sort of sick, twisted political dare. Gallego paused, letting the fierce anger rolling off him settle over the stunned room. He then looked for the absolute first time directly down the long curve of the table at Maxine Waters. Madame, ranking member, with all due respect, we deeply disagree on policy. We will undoubtedly disagree tomorrow. We will aggressively disagree the day after tomorrow. I will enthusiastically vote against almost every single thing that Senator Kennedy proposes for the absolute remainder of my time in this august body. But the reckless words you freely used directly in front of the Metropolitan Detention Center in downtown Los Angeles last June were hateful words that my own mother, a struggling woman who tirelessly raised 4 children entirely on a meager secretary's salary, while living in a cramped, 1-bedroom apartment in Chicago, Illinois, would absolutely not have ever allowed me to say to a passing postal carrier, much less to a brave young man in uniform lawfully standing on a public sidewalk, simply doing his sworn duty. Those vicious words were most certainly not the words of a Democratic Party that I want absolutely any part of, Madam Ranking Member, and I am definitively not going to be the United States Senator who sits cowardly in this room and pretends otherwise. I yield, Mr. Chairman. Part 216 erupted in a sound that was not quite a loud gasp. It was somehow quieter, deeper, and more profound than a gasp. It was the distinct, undeniable sound of a political era abruptly ending. A fiercely loyal Democrat, a sitting United States Senator, a highly decorated Marine veteran of the Iraq War, had just stood up in the middle of a highly publicized Republican committee hearing and passionately defended a black National Guard sergeant directly against the hateful words of his own party's longest-serving black congresswoman. He did not do it because he suddenly liked Republicans. He did not do it because he suddenly agreed with Senator Kennedy's politics. He did it purely because of the undeniable weight of the truth. The senator from Arizona's powerful statement is officially entered into the permanent record. The senator from Louisiana, Mr. Kennedy, is fully recognized for the remaining balance of his time. Senator Kennedy, maintaining his slow, methodical pace, did not stand. He checked the large digital clock. He had exactly 2 minutes and 43 seconds left on his original allotted time. He only needed a minute and a half. Madam Ranking Member, I am going to do exactly something that the gentlewoman from Ohio just desperately asked you to do, ma'am, and I want you to sincerely forgive me for doing it, because I truly think it is the absolute only thing I am currently qualified in this massive room to do right now. I want you to truly know, ma'am, that I see you. I fully know that you bravely marched in Selma. I know for a fact that you tirelessly organized dangerous voter registration drives in Watts back in 1973. when the aggressive local police would violently not let you do it. I know you physically carried vulnerable black women into the halls of power in Sacramento in 1976, who would have absolutely never made it there without your fierce strength. I know you stubbornly held the line on brutal welfare reform in 1996, when even Bill Clinton tried to break it. I am absolutely not going to sit here and pretend, ma'am, that absolutely any of that profound history did not happen. It most certainly did. It heavily counts. But that was a very long time ago, ma'am. And what I truly want to know, and what I deeply think Mrs. Mitchell wants to know, and what Sergeant Coleman silently wants to know, and what Congresswoman Beatty tearfully wants to know, and what a whole lot of hard-working, struggling folks down in Compton and Inglewood and Watts and Gardena desperately want to know, is exactly what happened between you and them somewhere along the winding way. You stood tall in this very Capitol when Newt Gingrich maliciously tried to take a hammer to Medicare in 1995. You stood tall in this Capitol when George W. Bush aggressively tried to privatize Social Security in 2005. You stood tall in this Capitol when Donald Trump viciously tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act in 2017. You stood, ma'am. You bravely stood every single time it truly mattered. But somewhere along the way, ma'am, you quietly stopped fighting for the desperate folks back home, and you selfishly started writing massive checks to your own daughter. Kennedy paused. He looked slowly down at his battered yellow legal pad, right where the number $68,000 circled heavily in thick blue ink, stared blankly back at him. You were supposed to be the meanest possum on the entire porch, ma'am, the fierce one that absolutely nobody could ever move. Instead, somewhere along the corrupted way, you twisted your sacred microphone into a personal mailbox, and you cruelly charged your own desperate people, the postage. The silence that immediately followed was not the sudden silence of shock, it was the much heavier, suffocating silence of total, undeniable recognition. Maxine Waters' as previously frozen index finger had been suspended awkwardly in the air for an agonizing 19 minutes. It finally came down to rest upon the hard surface of the witness table. It did not come back up. Maxine Waters suddenly stood up, not gracefully yielding but preparing for one final desperate fight. Mr. Chairman, I will absolutely not. I will not be hypocritically lectured on my own historic legacy by a cynical man whose own state ranks dead last in this entire country in literally every single measure of basic human dignity. I will not be lectured by a privileged senator who has consistently voted in this very body against every single civil rights protection that has ever come before him. I will not be, Madam Ranking Member. You are completely out of order. I am absolutely not out of order. Mr. Chairman, you are out of order. This entire corrupt Senate is out of order. This entire racist Republican Party is out of order. You are wholly complicit in the complete dismantling of Chairman Scott. Struck the gavel twice, the sharp cracks echoing like gunshots. Madam, please. Reclaiming my time. I am reclaiming my time, Mr. Chairman. Madam Ranking Member, with all due respect, ma'am, the gentlewoman is the witness today. The witness does not control the clock, the chair controls the time, and the chair is strongly asking the gentlewoman to immediately compose herself. I will absolutely not compose myself. I have spent 35 years, 3 rapid strikes of the gavel. The solid wood actually cracked against the base. Chairman Scott took a long, deep breath. He was fundamentally not a dramatic man. His voice was barely raised above conversational volume, yet it cut through the shouting. Madame Ranking Member, the chair is now going to directly ask the esteemed senator from Massachusetts, the ranking member of this committee, whether the Democratic minority has absolutely any objection to a formal motion to immediately suspend the witness's testimony for the absolute remainder of this morning. Scott turned his head slowly. He looked directly at Senator Elizabeth Warren. Senator Elizabeth Warren, Maxine Waters, as fellow progressive firebrand, her staunch ally of 13 years on the powerful banking committee, the very woman who had publicly called Maxine back in 2018 the most fearless woman in the entire United States House of Representatives, did not stand up. She did not reach out to lift her own gavel. She simply sat there and said in a voice so incredibly quiet that the sensitive C-SPAN microphones almost did not catch it. "Mr. Chairman, the minority has no objection to the chair's discretion." Maxine Waters turned her body incredibly slowly towards Senator Warren. Senator Warren stubbornly refused to turn back and meet her gaze. Maxine Waters then turned slowly toward the crowded row of observer seats, looking desperately toward Joyce Beatty, the very woman she had so often called her sister. Joyce Beatty, tears in her eyes, did not turn back either. Maxine Waters' trembling hands slowly came down to rest, flat on the cold witness table. She did not pick up her scattered papers. She did not look at her frantic press secretary. She did not look at her pale chief of staff. She did not look at her daughter Karen, who was undoubtedly watching live from a luxurious hotel suite at the JW Marriott down on Pennsylvania Avenue. She did not look at Yolanda Mitchell. She did not look at Sergeant Coleman. She finally said, very quietly enough that the C-SPAN microphones almost missed the total surrender. "I yield." Chairman Scott tapped his cracked gavel one final time, very gently. "The witness yields. The committee will safely recess for 30 minutes. He set the heavy gavel down. Maxine Waters did not move from the isolated witness table during the ensuing chaos of the recess. Her chief of staff cautiously approached. She rigidly did not respond. Her press secretary frantically approached. She completely ignored him. A prominent reporter from the Washington Post, a black woman, a journalist Maxine Waters had personally hand-selected for an extensive profile interview in 2023, bravely approached the table. A stern Capitol staffer immediately blocked her path. When the entire committee finally filed back into the room 30 minutes later, the wooden witness table was completely empty. Maxine Waters had silently left Hart 216 completely alone. Slipping quietly out through the discreet side door that directly leads out to Constitution Avenue, she left without speaking a single word to any reporter in the crowded hallway, without issuing a fiery press statement, and without ever looking back at the devastating room she had just walked out of. Chairman Scott called the scheduled afternoon panel to order at exactly 1:12 p.m. The afternoon panel proceeded exactly as routinely scheduled. Senator Cynthia Lummis gave dry testimony regarding the nuances of digital asset regulation. Senator Pete Ricketts asked her predictable questions. She answered them thoroughly. Absolutely nobody in that massive room ever mentioned the name Maxine Waters again. Even her own political party had silently walked out. Even Senator Elizabeth Warren would not lift a single finger to defend her legacy. Somewhere, thousands of miles away on Long Beach Boulevard in Compton, California, at exactly 4:47 inches, the late afternoon Pacific time, on that exact same day, Yolanda Mitchell quietly unlocked the heavy back door of Yolanda's Sweet Home Bakery, proudly rebuilt in 2021, just 2 doors down from the ashes of the original location. She slowly turned on the massive convection oven. Her scarred son Marcus came in quietly 15 minutes later. He carefully took off his long-sleeve shirt. He only ever wore short sleeves here at home, in the safety of the kitchen. He rigorously washed his hands deep in the industrial sink, and he began preparing the fresh dough for the very next morning's bake. Yolanda Mitchell did not cry a single tear. She had already cried all her tears back in 2018. She had cried them all again at the brutal lease eviction in 2019. She simply did not have any more tears left to give. Somewhere in the sprawling quiet of Section 60 at Arlington National Cemetery, at precisely 3:14 inches the afternoon Eastern Time, Sergeant Marcus Coleman knelt respectfully in the damp grass beside the stark white marble headstone of Lance Corporal Anthony Ramirez, his beloved cousin tragically killed in action in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, on the 7th of June, 2010. Coleman was still impeccably dressed in his heavy dress greens. He did not speak his cousin's name out loud. He had stopped doing that agonizing ritual 9 long years ago, acting on the wise advice of an old weathered chaplain back at Camp Pendleton, who had deeply understood that some profound prayers are simply better kept silent. He gently laid one strong hand flat against the cold stone. He left it there for exactly 2 minutes. Then he slowly stood up, carefully brushed the wet grass off the sharp creases of his trousers, walked silently back to his waiting rental car, drove methodically to Reagan National Airport, and was soon high up in the air on a crowded Southwest Airlines flight, heading back to Los Angeles International, long before the sun finally set. Somewhere hidden on the quiet 4th floor of the Cannon House office building, at exactly 5:58 inches the early evening, Representative Joyce Beatty sat entirely alone in her darkened personal office. Her glowing cell phone had received exactly 43 frantic calls. She had not answered a single one. The absolute only call she finally answered was from her beloved son, Otto Beatty III, a successful attorney working in private practice back in Columbus, Ohio. He asked her exactly one simple question, "Mom, was that incredibly hard?" "No, baby. It wasn't hard. It was just the truth. Daddy would be so incredibly proud, Mom." "I know." She gently hung up the phone. She sat silently in her dark office for another 40 minutes. Then she finally stood up and drove home. Somewhere in the exclusive, wealthy Hancock Park neighborhood of Los Angeles, California, at exactly 4:22 in the late afternoon Pacific time, inside a sprawling Tudor-style mansion situated on Rossmore Avenue, a luxurious property officially valued by the Los Angeles County Assessor's Office at a staggering $4.3 million, a house located 16 full miles, completely outside the official boundaries of California's 43rd Congressional District. Maxine Waters sat entirely alone in her immaculate front parlor. Her cell phone continuously rang. Her daughter Karen called twice. She rigidly did not answer. Her panicked chief of staff called. She did not answer. Her press secretary called. She did not answer. She simply sat perfectly still on the expensive couch, still wearing the bright magenta Chanel suit, and she stared blankly at the empty wall. Somewhere down in rural Zachary, Louisiana, at exactly 7:58 inches the evening Central Time, Senator John Kennedy quietly walked into the familiar warmth of Uncle Bogart's Bait and Tackle, located right off Highway 64. His cousin Thibodeau was casually leaning behind the scarred wooden counter. Thibodeau wordlessly poured him a steaming styrofoam cup of strong black coffee and smoothly slid it across the worn pine boards. "I saw it all on the TV today, John. You was real quiet today. Wasn't my place to be loud today, Thibodeau. Was that powerful lady? Was she really what they all say she was?" "No, Thibodeau. She was fiercely brave a very long time ago. Then she just got terribly tired." Thibodeau nodded slowly in understanding. He poured himself a cup of coffee and simply stood beside his cousin, both men quietly looking out the front window at the dusty dirt lot where 18 years ago Senator Kennedy's own daddy had patiently taught him how to bait a trot line. Senator Kennedy finished his coffee in silence. The political fallout was swift and merciless. Within 72 hours, the newly proposed bipartisan Pelosi Act, originally introduced by Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri back in 2025, rapidly gained 17 eager new co-sponsors, prominently including 4 powerful Democratic senators John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan, Ruben Gallego of Arizona, and Michael Bennett of Colorado. Within a single week, Representative Joyce Beatty bravely appeared on NBC's Meet the Press and was directly asked by host Kristen Welker whether she deeply regretted her dramatic statement back in Hart 216. She looked straight into the camera and said, quote, "Not for one single second. Mrs. Mitchell's innocent son has physical scars. My long friendship with Maxine absolutely does not." End quote. She fiercely did not back down an inch. Within a month, Maxine Waters' lucrative consulting firm, Progressive Connections, quietly and permanently closed its doors. Its final concluding filing with the Federal Election Commission was officially dated the 11th of April, 2026. Within 3 short months, Representative Maxine Waters formally announced that she would absolutely not seek re-election in the impending 2026 cycle. Her brief clinical statement, quietly released by her exhausted press secretary at exactly 6:12 a. Pacific Time on a sleepy Saturday morning in June, pointedly did not mention the devastating hearing. It did not mention Yolanda Mitchell. It did not mention Joyce Beatty. It did not mention Sergeant Marcus Coleman. It did not mention Senator Kennedy. It certainly did not mention the famous magenta Chanel suit, which her staff very quietly and anonymously donated to a struggling women's re-entry program located in South Los Angeles called New Beginnings. She absolutely did not give a soaring farewell speech on the historic floor of the United States House of Representatives. She flatly did not accept a prestigious Congressional gold medal ceremony, even though one had been politely offered out of tradition. She finally left the Capitol building forever on a quiet Tuesday morning in January of 2027, slipping away through a discreet side entrance of the Cannon House office building, accompanied only by her husband, Sidney Williams, and a single anonymous Capitol police officer she had never even met. Senator John Kennedy routinely returned to his seat on the Senate Banking Committee the very next Monday. He swiftly introduced, alongside Senator Ruben Gallego of Arizona, proudly acting as his primary co-sponsor, the sweeping Slate Mailer Reform Act of 2026. The aggressive bill permanently prohibits federal campaign committees from operating lucrative commercial slate mailer businesses. It strictly requires any direct line family payments originating from federal campaign committees to be thoroughly disclosed to the FEC on a highly scrutinized monthly basis rather than a loose quarterly basis. It overwhelmingly passed the Banking Committee by a massive vote of 18-5 on the 4th of May. As for Yolanda's Sweet Home Bakery, it shockingly received approximately $340,000 in unsolicited, heartfelt online donations from regular citizens across the country in the 10 short days immediately following the dramatic hearing. Yolanda Mitchell entirely used that incredible influx of money to permanently hire 4 additional struggling teenagers directly out of the Compton Unified School District. One of those young men, an eager 17-year-old boy named Deshaun Williams, successfully learned how to roll the delicate croissant dough on his very 4th shift. He proudly still works there to this very day. Sergeant Marcus Coleman quietly returned to his National Guard unit the exact Monday after the hearing concluded. He absolutely did not grant a single media interview. He has not given one since. The gavel finally fell. The massive room slowly emptied, and the powerful woman who had spent 35 fierce years demanding the right to reclaim her time ultimately and permanently ran out of it.